Well, good day, my friends. It's your old pal Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? I hope you said great. We're coming to you from just outside of Chicago, Illinois. We're going to be visiting a gravesite today of someone who's very controversial. In fact, his mark on history was not made here in Chicago. It was actually made in Dallas. And some called him a hero for what he did. What he did was murdering someone on national television. Daze with Jordan the Lion and you all. It begins right now. So in November of 1963, the nation was changed forever when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. Of course, we know that the accused murderer was Lee Harvey Oswald. And while Lee Harvey Oswald was in custody, being transported from the court building to an armored car, a man appeared in that brief moment with a gun, 38 caliber, and shot Lee Harvey Oswald. 2 hours later, he would die, and 2 days after that, the man who shot him would be indicted for murder. And that man was Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby is buried right here. Born Jacob Rubenstein. There are all kinds of conspiracies that have been attached to Jack Ruby, why he did it, how, what his connection to communism, Castro, Richard Nixon, LBJ, what it all meant. But Jack Ruby ended up being tried and had a very peculiar defense, considering that his actions were caught on national television. Now, as you can imagine, to many people he was a hero, and to many people he deprived them of getting justice for John F. Kennedy. But when it came time to having the trial, his family, Jack Ruby's family, was actually pretty wealthy. He had 8 siblings, and his sister actually had been the one that helped him get into nightclubs, which is where he made a lot of his money, and eventually then he got into strip clubs. So his family put up the money for a very good defense, and they got a man named Bell I, who was a pretty fast-talking attorney for his day and was known to get people off. And so the first thing they wanted to do was not have the trial in Dallas, because they knew that it was heavily covered. Everything with the president's assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald, everything had been so covered they didn't think they could get a fair trial. However, Judge Brown was assigned to this, and at first he was going to allow cameras into the courtroom, and then the Bar Association kind of pressured him not to. But he fought and believed that they could find an impartial jury, and he basically forced it to go through. We would find out later, that he had ulterior motives, and that he would tell people that that was actually his chance at national stardom to make his mark, and he did everything he could to not let the trial leave. Originally, he was going to allow it, but only if he could go with it, and none of the other jurisdictions would okay that, so he forced the trial to happen in Dallas. And so they had a hard time finding anyone that hadn't seen, either what happened live on television or a replay. So they just instructed people to disregard what they had seen before, and found the appropriate jury and put Jack Ruby to trial. Now, he was kind of a peculiar guy. He had never been married. He lived with another guy for a long time. Later on, they would find out that man considered Jack Ruby his boyfriend, but Jack was super attached to his dogs and referred to one of his dogs as his wife and the other dogs as his children. So his lawyer came up with the idea of he basically said that Jack had a psychomotor disorder, and it was actually called psychomotor epilepsy, and that he would have these moments where he would black out and not know what he was doing. And that was their defense, was that he had blacked out during this and was not in his right mind and did not know what was happening. Now, they had some support because the police officers that were there at the scene said that when they took him down, even once they had him down, had the gun out of his hand, he was still pulling the trigger with his finger with nothing there, as though he didn't know that the gun wasn't there. Now, the prosecution, they were trying to prove that this was all premeditated, and that they had witnesses that said that they had heard him make a call saying that he would make sure he was there. They had witnesses that said they had seen him around the courthouse an hour before. They had witnesses that said, you know, they had witnesses basically that kind of put him a little bit everywhere, but they also, the defense had witnesses that said they had seen Jack Ruby go into those black outfits. Now, what they would find out later, much later, is that he had gonorrhea and syphilis that he was being treated for. He would basically take these hair treatments that were supposedly, they found out later, were really bad. He had an addiction to weight loss pills that were basically speed. So he had a lot of things going on inside his body that potentially could have led to what they were saying happened. But that was their defense. They said that he was not in his right mind at the time and that he couldn't possibly know what he was doing, even though another officer said that he heard Jack say that he did that because he wanted to save Jackie Kennedy the trauma of having to come back to Dallas again. Now, Jack's defense team actually had 3 solid experts that came in. They studied him, they put him through various tests and said, yes, he indeed did suffer from that and would not have known what he was doing. But after a 10-day trial, the jury went, deliberated for 2 hours, and came back finding him guilty and sentencing him to death. Now, he went into prison and they immediately appealed it. His lawyer said that he felt like it was just the prosecution wanting to pin everything that had went on someone, and since Oswald wasn't there, they wanted to make sure that somebody paid for the pain that Dallas and all the people of the United States had felt. But the family of Jack Ruby fired the attorney. The attorney, when he showed up, originally had showed up with a documentary filmmaker to cover this, and he ended up writing a book. The judge ended up writing a book. I mean, it was crazy. So when everything was said and done, they did find that Jack Ruby was not given a fair trial, and that there were 182 different situations in the trial that were inappropriate or not ruled upon correctly. And so while they had got the verdict overturned, in the time that he was waiting for his new trial, he actually died in prison of cancer. But there was all kinds of weird speculation about what really happened there as well. You see, some people said that because he had those venereal diseases that he was on a monthly penicillin shot, and that once he went into jail, they weren't giving him his medications, and that likely could have been what made him kind of go crazy while he was inside. Now, there's also this story where someone named Jolly West, who was like a government doctor, there was always a kind of a rumor, or it's been said since, that Jack Ruby was actually running arms for Castro, and originally had been selling Jeeps to Castro's army, thinking that Castro would eventually take everything over. And So then they said that he also had worked for Richard Nixon in 1947. And so then there was a rumor that at one point the government had put Jack Ruby, they wanted Jack Ruby to take a syringe and to inject it into Castro and inject him with cancer. So this conspiracy theory that I've heard mentioned on various podcasts and things, and then they've mentioned that it's in several books, the theory is that once the conviction was overturned, when the Warren Report was happening, they interviewed Jack Ruby, and he was basically like giving them paranoid ramblings and really nothing they could use. It's believed that while he was in prison, he got the flu. And instead of just a local doctor coming, they sent this Jolly West person to come and check him over and to give him a shot. And many believe that that shot would have been cancer, and that they actually injected him with cancer at that time, which is why his health deteriorated so quickly from the time that he was in prison, and that they would never have to have the trial again. And apparently people have debunked so much of the Warren Commission. They said that they've really overlooked a lot of things that Jack Ruby did, where he apparently had made calls for days. Once Lee Harvey Oswald was apprehended, apparently there's a conspiracy theory that the mob had paid Jack Ruby to kill Oswald. Didn't want to do it or was afraid to do it, and so he was calling and saying that there were death threats against Oswald and to not move him in hopes that he wouldn't have to do the job. But there was also a statement from a woman who was interviewed for the Warren Commission that when they went back and interviewed her years later and asked her about, what she saw, she said that the day before Kennedy was assassinated, she had seen Jack Ruby there dropping off 2 guns to a man, and it was at the grassy knoll. And she said that when the Warren Commission had asked her, she told them that she had seen that, and they put in the report that she had not seen that. And when they showed her the signature, she said, "That is not my signature, it's been forged." So there's a lot of crazy, unknown about Jack Ruby and what really was all behind all of this. But they also said that once there was this story, I guess, that that Stevenson was going to originally be asked to be the vice president, but that someone had muscled that out and muscled Lyndon Baines Johnson in. And when Ruby was apprehended, someone said that they overheard him saying that if Stevenson had got in, none of this would ever have happened. Pretty crazy story for this guy. I mean, he grew up here in Chicago. Apparently his mom had a lot of mental health issues. She was in and out of asylums throughout his youth. So he basically grew up on the streets and then joined the Air Force and was a mechanic for the Air Force. And when he came out, he went to Dallas, where his sister owned some of the clubs, and that's where it all got started. But in the end, it was just a strip club owner that ended up killing Lee Harvey Oswald, and who knows what answers we would have gotten out of him. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed this vlog. The movie Ruby was actually pretty good. There's some interesting stuff in there also that a lot of people don't or didn't know before. So we'll see you all next time from one of the more controversial graves in history, Jack Ruby's grave. Have a great night, everyone. Goodbye.